"Mom, I think Max just saved my life." I shouted those words so loud my voice echoed off the kitchen walls. The look on Mom's face was a perfect mix of confusion and concern, the kind only a mother could wear when her 13-year-old runs into the house breathless, clutching a scratched elbow and pointing toward the basement. But to understand what really happened, I've got to start at the beginning, when Max first came into our lives. Dad always wanted a dog. Growing up on a farm in Ohio, he had stories about dogs that could herd cattle, fetch his shoes, and even bark at the mailmen like clockwork. But life got busy, and by the time Dad had a house, a family, and a mortgage in suburban Pennsylvania, a dog just didn't seem to fit into the equation. Until Grandma passed, and left behind a little money and a note in her handwriting that said, "For something that brings joy, get the dog, Jim." So we did. We didn't go to a breeder or a fancy pet shop. Mom was set on adopting. She spent hours on websites, scrolling through pictures of beagles, retrievers, and poodles, until she found a listing for a 2-year-old German shepherd named Max. He was in a shelter about 30 minutes away and had been rescued from a bad situation. The woman on the phone said he was healthy, vaccinated, and just needed a loving home. Dad was sold. We piled into the car that Saturday and drove out to meet him. The moment Max saw us, he sat up tall in his kennel, ears perked, eyes alert. He didn't bark or jump. He just looked straight at us like he already knew we were his people. The handler opened the door, and Max walked out slowly, stopping right in front of me. He sniffed my hand, then leaned his head against my chest. That was it. We were done for. Bringing Max home was like adding a new person to the family. He followed us around from room to room, slept in my bedroom on a blanket by the bed, and learned to open the back screen door with his nose. But there was one thing that stood out right away. Max hated the basement. It wasn't just a mild dislike. The first time Dad tried to take some old boxes downstairs, Max darted in front of him, barking and growling. We thought maybe he was scared of the dark or the smell of mildew, but it kept happening. Every time someone got near the basement door, Max would stand stiff, hackles raised, a deep growl in his throat. He never acted like that about anything else, not even the vacuum cleaner. Dad joked that Max must have watched one too many horror movies before we got him. Mom figured maybe something in his past had happened in a basement, and it triggered bad memories. We agreed not to force him. The basement was mostly for storage anyway, full of Christmas decorations, old toys, and camping gear we never used. We just kept the door closed and didn't think much of it. Until the noises started. It was little things at first. I'd be doing homework in the kitchen and hear a faint creak coming from below. Or a soft thump, like something shifting on its own. Dad thought it was the house settling. Mom said maybe mice. But Max would perk up every time. He'd lift his head, ears twitching, and move to the door with that low, warning growl rumbling in his chest. One night, a week after Max came home, I woke up to him whining at my bedroom door. He paced in circles, then ran out into the hallway and barked toward the basement. I got up and followed him, half asleep and barefoot. When I reached the top of the stairs, he stood between me and the door, growling like there was someone down there. Dad came out of his room, rubbing his eyes, and asked what was going on. "I think there's something down there," I said, my heart pounding. Dad sighed and pulled on his slippers. "I'll check it out. Probably just a raccoon or something got in through the vent." Max tried to follow, but Dad told him to stay. That dog looked so distressed I almost cried. He whimpered, paced in tight circles, and barked at the door even after Dad went down. A minute passed, then 2. We heard Dad moving things around, his voice muttering something we couldn't make out. Then came the shout. "Julie, call the police." Mom ran for the phone. Max barked so loud I thought he'd break the door down. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there, frozen. A few minutes later, Dad came back up, out of breath and pale. "There's someone living down there," he said. "Sleeping bag, cans of food, a backpack. Someone's been in our basement." The police came and did a full sweep. They didn't find the person, but they confirmed everything Dad saw. Someone had broken into the basement through a broken window behind the house and had been living there quietly, probably for weeks. We were stunned. It didn't make sense. We had an alarm system, locked doors, and the window was hidden behind bushes. None of us had noticed a thing. But Max did. He knew. After that, Max became a local legend. The police even said if it weren't for him, we might never have known. Who knows what could have happened? Everyone in the neighborhood suddenly wanted to know more about our dog. The same people who once gave us looks for adopting a rescue instead of getting a puppy were now asking where they could find a dog like Max. But it didn't stop there. That was just the beginning of what Max would do for our family. Even after the window was fixed and the police assured us it was safe, Max still watched the basement door. But it wasn't fear anymore. It felt like he was guarding us. He'd sit there at night, quiet and still, his eyes locked on that door as if to say, "Don't worry, I've got this." It made me wonder how he knew. What was it about that place, that moment, that tipped him off? Dogs don't speak, but Max's actions said more than words ever could. He wasn't just a pet. He was a protector, and he hadn't even shown us everything he was capable of yet. That was just the first week. Max became something like a celebrity in our neighborhood after the whole basement incident. Kids who had never bothered to talk to me before would stop by on their bikes just to ask if they could pet him. Mr. Connors from across the street started waving at us every morning when we walked Max down the block. Even the mailman, who Max usually watched with intense suspicion, began carrying little dog biscuits in his pocket. And through all of it, Max stayed calm and steady, like none of the attention mattered to him. He didn't care about being famous. He just cared about us. After the police came and went, Mom started sleeping a little lighter. Dad double-checked the doors every night before bed. I guess we all did little things to feel safer. But for me, the real comfort came from Max. I'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes and see his shape curled up by my door, his ears twitching at every creak and rustle. He never let his guard down, not completely. About 2 weeks later, we started to notice something strange again. It began with Max's behavior during our walks. We'd be out for our usual route, past the elementary school, around the cul-de-sac, and through the small park by the pond, and Max would suddenly stop. Not like when he had to go to the bathroom, or when a squirrel darted across the path. This was different. He'd plant all 4 paws, his body stiff, nose high in the air, and stare off into the trees by the edge of the park. At first, we thought maybe it was a deer. We had a few in the area, and Max had chased one off our lawn once. But the way he looked, it was like he was sensing something we couldn't see. "Is it happening again?" Mom whispered one afternoon, clutching her sweater a little tighter. Dad shook his head. "Can't jump to conclusions. He's just being protective. Dogs do that." But something didn't sit right. The next time we walked past that spot, Max stopped again. Same posture, same tension. And then he growled. Not loudly, not like he had with the basement. This was quieter, deeper. Like a warning only meant for the thing he sensed. I remember looking into the trees and seeing nothing but green. No movement, no sound, but Max wouldn't budge until we turned around and walked home another way. It became a pattern. Every afternoon, same spot, same reaction. Then one day, he bolted. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, one of those days when spring still had a grip, but summer was knocking at the door. We were out for a walk, Max trotting calmly ahead on his leash, when we reached the park. This time, he didn't stop. He lunged. I barely had time to hold on. The leash slipped right out of my hand, and Max took off across the grass, straight into the trees. "Max!" I shouted, taking off after him. I heard Mom and Dad calling from behind, but my legs were already moving. Branches whipped at my face as I pushed through the undergrowth. I could hear Max barking ahead, loud and sharp. My heart thudded in my ears. When I caught up, he was standing in a small clearing, barking furiously at a thicket of bushes. His fur was raised, tail rigid. "Max, what is it?" I asked, breathless. He didn't look at me. He just barked again, then darted forward and pawed at the base of the bush. That's when I saw it. A piece of fabric. A red and black flannel shirt, half buried under the leaves. I reached out carefully and tugged at it. A second later, my fingers closed around something hard. A backpack. By then, Dad had caught up. He saw what I was holding and crouched down beside me. Inside the backpack were a few cans of food, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. "Someone's been camping out here," Dad said quietly. We called the police again. When they came, they took everything as evidence. They said it was likely the same person who'd been in our basement, maybe moving around the neighborhood, staying just out of Shawit. "Max picked up the scent," one of the officers said, giving him an admiring pat. "That dog's got good instincts. You're lucky to have him." After that, Max was even more serious about his walks. He didn't just sniff around like a normal dog anymore. He investigated. He'd pause at mailboxes, peer into storm drains, even stand still and stare at windows until he was sure there was nothing wrong. It made me feel safe, yeah, but also curious. How did he know so much? It was like he'd been trained for this. One evening, I brought it up at dinner. "Do you think Max was a police dog or something? Before the shelter?" Dad nodded slowly. "Could be. Some shelters get dogs that were trained but didn't pass final evaluations. Or maybe he was with someone who trained him privately." "He acts like he knows stuff," I said. "Stuff we don't." "He definitely knows something," Mom said with a smile. "And thank goodness he does." After dinner, I sat on the porch steps while Max lay beside me, his head on his paws. The sun was setting, the sky painted in streaks of orange and pink. I looked at him and said, "You're not just a regular dog, are you?" He lifted his head and gave me a soft, quiet bark. Summer came, and Max kept up his duties. We signed him up for a few obedience classes, just to see if there was anything we could learn together. The trainer, a middle-aged man named Rick, was immediately impressed. "This dog's smart," Rick said on the first day. "Like military-grade smart, he's not just following commands, he's thinking 2 steps ahead." Max flew through the beginner classes and was moved up to advanced after 2 sessions. He learned new commands like he already knew them. Heel, stay, search. It all came naturally. But even with all the new tricks and exercises, Max never forgot about the basement. Every night, like clockwork, he'd sit by that door. We eventually moved his dog bed right there, since he preferred it to any other spot. And while we stopped hearing noises down there, he never let up. He watched. Guarded. One night, around midnight, I woke up to the sound of his bark. Not loud, but sharp and urgent. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway. Max was by the basement again, growling. Dad came out of his room, flashlight in hand. "Stay back," he told me, then opened the door and started down the steps. Max followed this time. They were down there for a few minutes. I held my breath the whole time. Finally, Dad came back up, shaking his head. "False alarm," he said. "Probably a squirrel on the roof making noise." But Max wouldn't settle. He kept pacing in front of the door, growling low, even after it was closed. That's when Dad decided to install cameras. He bought a set of motion sensor cameras and set one up in the basement, one in the backyard, and one in the hallway pointed at the basement door. It made all of us feel better, like we were finally taking back control. A week went by. No alerts. Nothing unusual. Then, one morning, Mom called us all into the living room. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the laptop. It was a recording from the night before. The camera in the basement had picked up movement. At 3:17 a.m., something small and fast darted across the screen. Not a person, not even a raccoon, a cat. "How did it get down there?" I asked. We checked the basement and found a small hole behind the water heater, barely big enough for an animal to squeeze through. It must have been how the intruder got in weeks earlier, too. Dad sealed it up that day, using a patch kit and some heavy-duty mesh. Max sniffed around the area and gave a satisfied bark when the job was done. And yet, he still guarded that door every night. Maybe he remembered. Maybe he just wanted to make sure nothing ever slipped past us again. Whatever the reason, we were thankful. Because Max wasn't just keeping us safe anymore. He was helping us grow stronger, more aware, more connected. And the strangest thing was, he hadn't even been with us for 2 full months yet. The real surprises were still to come. It was just before the 4th of July when everything changed again. Our little town always went all out for the holiday. Flags on every porch, parades with local bands, and the biggest fireworks show in the county at the fairgrounds. That year, Dad got us tickets to the evening festival. Food trucks, games, music, and we were excited to take Max with us. He'd done great with crowds before, and we thought the fresh air and activity would be good for him. The morning of the festival, Max was his usual alert self. He followed Dad into the garage while he looked for the fold-out chairs, stayed close to Mom in the kitchen while she packed sandwiches, and trotted alongside me when I ran upstairs to grab my phone charger. But later, as we all piled into the car, Max didn't jump in like he usually did. He just stood there, head turned toward the house. Perked. "Come on, Max," I said, patting the seat beside me. He took a few steps forward, then stopped again. His eyes were locked on the side of the house, near the basement windows. Dad came around the back and knelt beside him. "What's the matter, buddy? Don't feel like going out today?" Max finally jumped into the car, but his body was tense. The whole ride, he sat upright, alert, occasionally sniffing the air as if something didn't sit right with him. At the festival, he started to relax. He sniffed around the lawn, wagged his tail when kids asked to pet him, and even let out a little bark during the pie-eating contest. We walked past food stalls, listened to live music, and played ring toss until the sun dipped behind the trees. Then the fireworks started. Max didn't flinch at the first few pops. He watched the sky like the rest of us. But about 10 minutes in, he stood up suddenly, eyes scanning the crowd. Then he barked, loud, insistent. He looked up at me, then at Dad, then in the direction of the parking lot. "What is it, Max?" Dad asked. Max barked again, then started pulling toward the exit. It was clear he wanted us to follow. We hesitated. The show had just begun, and we hadn't even opened our snacks. But Max wasn't giving up. He barked again, more urgently this time, and tugged harder on the leash. Maybe we should head back, Mom said, standing up. Something's got him spooked. We gathered our things and made our way through the crowd. People gave us curious looks. Some even frowned, but we didn't stop. Max led the way to the car, jumped in without hesitation, and barked once as if to say, "Let's go, now!" The moment we pulled into our driveway, Max jumped out and bolted to the side of the house. He barked frantically at the basement window. Dad dropped everything and ran after him. "Get the flashlight," he called, "and call the sheriff's office." I grabbed my phone and handed Dad the light. He crouched by the window while Max stood beside him, teeth bared, growling low. "It's open," Dad said. "The latch is broken. Someone's been here." The sheriff arrived within 15 minutes. They did another full sweep of the house and the basement. This time, they found something. Fingerprints on the inside of the window, muddy boot prints leading to the back door, and a torn scrap of fabric caught on the fence. Whoever it was, they'd come back. And they'd known we were out. The next few days were tense. Dad installed motion lights and new locks. Mom ordered a security system with outdoor cameras and even sensors for the basement windows. We didn't go out as a family after dark anymore. Max hardly left his post near the basement. Still, none of us could understand how Max knew. How had he sensed the danger before it happened? How did he know to leave the fireworks show early? It felt like something beyond instinct, like he'd seen a puzzle we didn't even know existed. That's when Dad got curious. He called the shelter where we'd adopted Max and asked if they had any additional information about his past. The woman on the phone said they only had what was in the file, rescued from a neglectful owner, no chip, no official training history. But she did give us the number of the rescue group that had pulled Max from the original situation. Dad called the rescue group next. The man who answered was named Tom, and when Dad mentioned Max's description, there was a long pause. "German Shepherd? About 2 years old? Big scar on his back left leg?" "That's him," Dad said. "Do you know anything about where he came from?" Tom hesitated. "We got him from an impound case. There were some unusual details. We weren't told much, just that the dog had been part of a property seizure. The guy who owned him was arrested for illegal surveillance stuff. Max was found in a shed full of radio equipment." "Surveillance?" "Yeah. The guy had wires, cameras, the works. We think Max might have been trained to guard it. Or at least, he got used to picking up on strange behavior." That explained a lot. Max wasn't just smart. He'd been around shady things. He'd learned to recognize patterns, behaviors, scents that didn't belong. No wonder he reacted to certain places and people like he did. When Dad shared the story with us, we all sat quietly for a few minutes, absorbing it. Max lay at Mom's feet, eyes closed, but ears twitching at every sound. "Whatever happened to him," Mom said softly, "he's using it now to protect us." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't have to. We just knew Max had become something more than a pet. He was family, and not just in the way pets usually are. He was active, present, watching out for us. The sheriff's office increased patrols in our neighborhood after the break-in attempt. They encouraged everyone to keep their lights on at night, lock their doors, and report anything suspicious. Then, one afternoon, Max gave us a new signal. He was lying on the front porch while I did my summer reading beside him. A delivery truck pulled up to the curb, and the driver hopped out with a package. Max sat up, watching him. Not growling, not barking, just observing. But as the man walked up the path, Max stood and stepped forward, his body tense. "It's just a delivery," I told him. The man placed the box on the step and gave me a smile. "Evening. Nice dog," I smiled back. Thanks, he's protective. He nodded, turned, and walked back to his truck. Max didn't relax until the man had driven away. Later that evening, we opened the box and found a set of dish towels Mom had ordered. But underneath the towels, stuffed between the packaging, was a small, square envelope. No name, just a blank front. Dad opened it. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy picture of our house, taken at night, from the woods. We called the sheriff again. They took the envelope and the box. They dusted it for prints, checked the delivery logs, and started tracking the driver's route. It turned out the man wasn't even an employee of the delivery company. The van had been stolen the day before. Whoever he was, he'd gotten close. Right to our doorstep. Max had known. After that, things ramped up. Deputies stayed parked on our street overnight for the next week. The neighbors were alerted. A few security experts came out to check our property. But the best protection was already with us. Max never left the porch now. Day or night, rain or shine, he lay there like a sentry, eyes always moving, nose always working. He was our shield. But even as the tension grew, so did something else. A bond, not just between Max and me, or Max and my family, but among all of us. We talked more, ate together more, played games in the living room, made homemade ice cream, even built Max a custom doghouse, though he barely used it. He liked being close, and I liked knowing he was close. One night, about a week after the photo incident, I woke up to a sound outside my window. A soft rustle. I looked out and saw nothing. But Max was already at the front door, barking like his life depended on it. Dad came out in seconds, flashlight and phone in hand. He opened the door, and Max took off. He bolted across the yard toward the side of the house and disappeared around the back. By the time we caught up, Max was standing over something on the lawn. A backpack. Whoever had dropped it must have run when they heard the barking. Inside the bag were a pair of binoculars, a notepad with numbers and times scribbled in it, and a bottle of water. No ID, no wallet. The sheriff's office collected it and started a deeper investigation. Max had once again prevented something we couldn't even define yet. That night, I sat beside him on the porch and whispered, "I don't know how you do it, but I'm glad you're here." He leaned his head against my shoulder, and for the first time in days, I felt like we were going to be okay. What we didn't know was that Max was preparing us for something bigger, something that hadn't happened yet. And when it did, he'd be ready. Max always knew before we did. That much was certain. It had become a quiet truth in our house, like the way the porch creaked in the afternoon or the scent of Mom's coffee in the mornings. Max knew things, not because someone taught him, but because something in him understood the world differently than we did. By August, life had settled into a new rhythm. Max's presence kept our nerves in check, and the sheriff's team continued their investigation into the strange occurrences surrounding our house. Patrol cars still passed by in the evenings, and the deputy, a kind guy named Brett, would occasionally stop by to check in and toss Max a treat. Brett had grown fond of Max. Everyone had. The backpack, the photograph, the broken window. Those were no longer seen as separate events. They were pieces of something larger. That idea had begun to weigh on us. Someone out there was watching, maybe planning, but they hadn't succeeded in getting too close again. Because of Max. Despite everything, school was starting again soon. I was heading into 8th grade, and while my friends were texting about new backpacks and crushes, I was triple-checking the locks and sleeping with a flashlight under my pillow. Life felt split in two. Normal on the outside, something else entirely underneath. One afternoon, about a week before school began, I was out in the backyard with Max, tossing a tennis ball. He wasn't interested in fetch as much as he used to be. He'd chase the ball once or twice, then stop, ears high, eyes scanning. This time, when I threw it toward the shed, he stopped halfway, stared at the shed's door, then slowly backed away. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a raccoon had been in there again. But Max didn't growl. He just stared, quiet, like something wasn't quite right. Later that night, Dad went out with a flashlight to check. He didn't see anything unusual. The shed was locked, no signs of forced entry. Still, he decided to add a camera to the corner of the roof facing the shed. Just in case. 2 nights later, that camera caught something. At 3:42 a.m., a figure appeared at the edge of the yard. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes and a hat pulled low. The figure moved with care, avoiding the motion lights and walking a path only someone familiar with our setup would know. They went to the shed, stopped at the door, crouched low, and pulled out something, probably tools. Then, Max appeared. He must have heard them from inside the house. The video showed his silhouette burst through the doggy door and launch into the yard, full sprint. No barking, no warning, just motion. The figure stood up in a panic, dropped the tool, and ran. Max chased them to the fence line. We never saw their face. The sheriff's office reviewed the footage the next morning. Brett shook his head. This isn't some random drifter. This person knew what they were doing. They studied your routine, knew where to step, what to avoid, and Max still beat them. That night, Dad didn't sleep. I could hear him pacing. Mom lay awake beside him, both of them trying to make sense of why we were the ones being targeted. Max stayed by the door. The next day, something unexpected happened. We got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. It said, "Call off the dog, last warning." There was no name, no clue where it came from, just 5 words that hit us like a punch to the chest. Max sniffed the envelope. His nose twitched rapidly, and he growled, loudly. We turned the letter over to the sheriff. The handwriting didn't match any of the known samples they had, but it confirmed what we already knew. This was targeted. This was personal. That evening, Dad sat us all down in the living room. Max lay at his feet. "We have 2 choices," Dad said. "We either let this scare us into changing how we live, or we take control of the situation. We do everything in our power to make sure Max is supported, that we stay alert, and that we never let fear win." We chose the second. Dad enrolled Max in a scent detection training program offered by a nearby working dog center. It was a 2-week evening course designed for advanced dogs. The trainer, a retired canine handler named Walter, immediately took interest in Max. "This dog's been through something," Walter said after their first session. "He works like he's on duty, like something in him never turned off. I've only seen that a few times." Max took to the training like he'd been waiting for it. Every task, every scenario, he nailed it, finding hidden objects, identifying subtle scents, even alerting on a hidden person in a mock search and rescue drill. Walter was impressed. "If you ever wanted to get him certified," he said to Dad, "he'd pass with flying colors." But we weren't trying to make Max a professional. We just wanted to understand him better, to give him purpose, and honestly, to let him show us whatever it was he seemed to be carrying. By the end of the course, Max had changed. Not drastically, but enough that we noticed. He was more focused, more deliberate. He'd check each room before settling in. He'd lead our walks with intention, often pausing at intersections or peering into alleyways we passed. It was like he'd taken his job to the next level. One night, about a week after training ended, Max wouldn't go to sleep. He paced the hallway, barking low, tail down. Dad got up and walked the perimeter with him, flashlight in hand. Nothing. But Max stayed tense. The next morning we found what he must have sensed. On the side of the house, just below the basement window, someone had carved a single line into the siding. Not a word. Just a scratch, jagged and deliberate, like someone wanted us to know they'd been there. Again. Mom cried. Not because of the scratch, but because it meant they still hadn't stopped. Max sat beside her, nose pressed against her knee. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't lick her hand. He just stayed still, eyes steady. That afternoon, we met with the sheriff and a detective from a regional task force. They'd been following a string of similar incidents in neighboring towns: unexplained surveillance, targeted messages, pets reacting before people, even a case where someone tried to lure a dog away from a house. These guys test boundaries, the detective said. They look for weaknesses. When they find none, they escalate. The suggestion was simple but chilling. Someone had tried to scare us into removing Max, because he was the boundary they couldn't cross. That evening, we installed 2 more cameras, one in the tree facing the back fence and one by the front porch. Max watched us as we worked, then took his usual position by the basement door. We never tried to move him. It felt wrong to ask. That was his post, his choice. Over the next few days, things were quiet. No letters, no figures. Max even seemed to loosen up. He lay on the porch with his tongue out, trotted around the yard a little more, and let my friends pet him when they came by on their bikes. But I noticed something. He never let his back face the woods. It was a Saturday morning when everything turned again. I'd taken Max for a walk through the park. It was early, barely past sunrise, and the air still held that cool morning breeze. Max was calm, sniffing the grass, occasionally chasing a leaf. Then, just as we passed the pond, he stopped. His body stiffened. I followed his gaze and saw a man, maybe in his 30s, sitting alone on a bench. Dressed normally. Nothing suspicious about him. But Max growled. Low. Quiet. Like he didn't want to draw attention. Just make it known. The man looked up, saw us, and smiled. He nodded, stood up, and walked away down the path. Didn't run. Didn't say a word. But Max didn't move until the man was out of sight. I told Dad about it when we got home. He showed the sheriff the video from Max's collar cam. The man's face wasn't fully visible, but it was enough to put the neighborhood on alert. The next day, someone left a note under our mailbox. You think the dog can stop what's coming? Think again. That was the last straw. The sheriff assigned a full-time patrol to our street. The regional task force made our case a priority. Max was officially considered part of the protective detail for our property. He didn't act like a dog anymore. He was something else. A sentinel, a guardian with his own code. And he was waiting. Not nervously. Not afraid. He was just waiting for the moment they'd try again. Because when they did, Max would be ready. Max knew before we did. That became our family mantra, a quiet phrase passed in glances and murmurs anytime something seemed off. And over time, we stopped questioning it. If Max growled, we listened. If he barked, we moved. If he refused to enter a room or lingered by a door, we adjusted our steps. His instincts had earned our trust too many times to count. It was no longer about whether something was happening. It was about when. By September, things in the neighborhood felt different. The sheriff's patrols hadn't stopped, and people had grown more cautious. Garage lights flicked on earlier in the evenings, curtains were drawn tighter, and some neighbors added locks to gates they'd never even bothered to close before. Still, life went on. Kids returned to school, football games filled the weekends, and the leaves started to shift into yellows and reds. The morning it all started again, there was no warning. No envelope, no shadow in the woods, just a sound. A simple knock at the front door while Mom and I were making breakfast. 3 soft knocks. Max was already at the door before we turned around. He stood there, stiff, tail still, ears pointing straight ahead. Then he let out one bark. Not aggressive, but firm. Dad walked in from the garage, holding his phone and wiping sweat from his brow. "Expecting anyone?" he asked. Mom shook her head. I walked over to the window beside the door and peeked out. No one was there, no cars, no delivery truck, just the morning light cutting across the lawn. "That's weird," I said. "There's nobody." Dad stepped out onto the porch with Max at his side. Max didn't bark again, but he stared straight at the oak tree near the curb. "You see anything?" Mom called from inside. "Nope," Dad said. "But Max does?" That evening, we reviewed the porch camera footage. At exactly 8:02 a.m., the screen lit up with motion. A tall man approached from the left, stepped onto the porch, and raised his hand to knock. He wore a long, dark coat, and his face was obscured by the shadow of a cap. As soon as Max appeared on screen, the man turned and walked away. No hesitation. No pause. The footage didn't show where he went. He just vanished past the edge of the camera's view. "That's not a neighbor," Dad said, his eyes locked on the screen. "No," Mom said, her voice low. And he wasn't expecting a dog. That night, Max didn't sleep. He paced. He growled. He checked each window and door. Every time the wind shifted or a branch moved, he was alert. By morning, he looked tired, but no less determined. The next few days passed with more of the same. A knock at the back door when we were upstairs. Footprints in the flower bed below the living room window. A snapped twig on the back porch. Never direct. Never obvious. But always just enough. Then, finally, something broke the pattern. It was a Thursday afternoon. I'd just gotten home from school, and Max greeted me like always, tail wagging, ears perked. But something was off. His eyes flicked toward the garage, then back to me. "What's up, bud? You hear something?" He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just turned and trotted toward the garage door, pausing once to glance over his shoulder. I followed. The garage smelled like oil and dust. Dad had left his toolbox open on the workbench, and a ladder leaned against the far wall from where he'd been working on the motion sensor light. Max walked straight to the back corner, where a pile of old storage bins sat stacked high. He sniffed, circled once, then sat down facing the wall, perfectly still. "What is it?" He didn't move. I walked over and tapped the wall. Nothing. I pressed my ear to it and heard nothing. No scratching, no dripping, just silence. Then Max stood up, sniffed the baseboard, and let out a low, quiet whine. That night, Dad and I pulled the bins away and unscrewed the paneling. Behind it was a crawl space we didn't even know existed, probably from an old renovation. It was shallow and dusty, filled with cobwebs, but tucked into the corner was something that didn't belong. A motion-activated camera. Dad cursed under his breath and pulled it down carefully. The sheriff's team took it the next morning, Hidden inside was a small SD card with over 100 files, images, timestamps, notes. Someone had been watching our garage, from the inside. We couldn't figure out how it got there. There were no signs of forced entry. The only explanation was that someone had been in the house while we were gone. Maybe more than once. Max had known. "He's not just sensing people," Brett told us. "He's reading situations, patterns, behavior." Mom didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. Dad took off work to stay home. We reinforced the doors, updated every alarm, and set up another round of new cameras, this time inside the house. Max checked each room like clockwork. He'd sniff corners, circle the furniture, and pause at certain windows. It became part of our daily routine. We didn't question it anymore. We just followed his lead. Then came the package. It arrived on a Monday morning, left by our front gate. No postage, no label, just a plain brown box sealed with black tape. Max spotted it first. He stood at the gate and refused to let anyone near it. Dad called the sheriff's office. They sent a unit and a bomb squad technician, just in case. The package didn't contain explosives, but what was inside made our blood run cold. Photographs. Dozens of them. All of us. Me walking to school, Mom at the grocery store, Dad in the garage, Max on the porch. Some were recent. Others were from months ago. They hadn't just been watching. They'd been everywhere. The sheriff's department launched a full investigation. They coordinated with surrounding counties, traced the SD card from the crawlspace camera, and matched it to a case file from another town. A suspect known for surveillance crimes, suspected of trespassing and stalking. No arrests had been made yet, but now they had a name. Ronald Mercer. The photo from the park bench matched his driver's license. The man Max had growled at. The man who had nodded and walked away. He was real. They issued a warrant for his property. By the end of the week, law enforcement found a trailer hidden deep in the woods 3 towns over. Inside were maps, notes, audio recordings, and what looked like plans to target homes just like ours. Families with children. Family attires with dogs. He was testing responses, the detective said. Timing reactions, measuring how quickly people noticed. Max had thrown off every step. They didn't find Mercer himself. Not yet. But they were close. And Max? He went back to the porch. Every night, same position, facing the road, back to the house. At school, I found it harder to concentrate. My friends asked why I was tired, why I jumped at locker doors slamming. I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that your dog is the only thing standing between you and someone who wants to get inside your life, your house, your safety? On the outside, nothing had happened. But inside, everything had changed. And the scariest part was knowing Max wasn't finished yet. Whatever was coming, whatever Mercer had started, Max was still watching for it. And we were starting to understand that this dog wasn't just protecting us. He was preparing us for something bigger. And that something was getting closer. We were being watched, closer and longer than we ever could have imagined. The photographs in the box weren't just recent. Some of them were dated nearly a year back, long before we even adopted Max. The realization that someone had been quietly monitoring our family for that long was the most unsettling part of all. It wasn't random. It wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was planned. The name Ronald Mercer took over the house. We didn't say it much aloud, but it was there, behind everything we did. I would catch Dad sitting in front of his laptop late into the night, scrolling through news articles and case files. Mom stopped going to the grocery store alone. She insisted on driving me to and from school, even though it was only a 15-minute walk. Every motion light, every creak in the floor, every flicker of shadow, it all carried weight. And then there was Max. He became even more disciplined. We didn't teach him. We couldn't have. But he started making rounds around the property at regular intervals. Every morning at 6 a.m., he'd circle the house. Noon, again. Just after sunset, again. He didn't bark unless he had to. He didn't act afraid. But it was clear he was preparing. He knew something was coming. We just didn't know what. Then came the night the basement light turned on by itself. We were all in the living room watching an old movie. Max was on the floor near the front door, his head resting on his paws. It was the first time all day he looked relaxed. Then, out of nowhere, he shot up. His ears perked, and his eyes locked onto the hallway. None of us had heard anything. Dad paused the movie. "What is it, boy?" Max didn't move, just swooshed. I turned and saw it, a thin strip of light glowing beneath the basement door. Nobody had gone down there. Max growled. Low, deep. The kind of growl that made your skin tighten. Dad stood up, grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter, and gestured for me and Mom to stay put. Max didn't wait for permission. He followed Dad to the door, tail rigid, head low. When the door creaked open, Max bounded down the stairs ahead of him. The rest of us sat in the tense silence of the living room. Every sound amplified. A floorboard groaning upstairs. The wind pushing gently against the window panes. The hum of the refrigerator. Then a shout. "Stay back!" Dad's voice echoed from the basement. Mom leapt from the couch and ran toward the stairs. I was right behind her. We found Dad standing near the furnace, Max in front of him in a defensive stance. Across the room, near the wall where the crawl space used to be, a man sat slumped against the shelves, eyes squinting in the flashlight's beam. Ronald Mercer. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared. He looked older than his photos, pale, tired, desperate. Max didn't bark. He just held his ground, breathing steady, ready to spring. The police arrived less than 5 minutes later. Mercer didn't resist. He didn't even speak. They cuffed him and led him up the stairs without incident. Max stood at the top of the steps, watching until they closed the cruiser doors. We thought that was it. It wasn't. The investigation revealed that Mercer had been watching dozens of families. He had files, notes, names, all arranged by patterns, how they moved, where they went, what time their lights went off at night. We weren't his only target, but we were the only ones he had approached directly, and the only ones with Max. He had snuck into the basement through the old coal chute, a hidden entrance from before the house had been renovated, covered by insulation and an unused shelf. We'd never even noticed it, but Max had. He'd been staring at that corner for weeks, guarding it. The authorities were stunned. "This dog," one of the officers said, kneeling beside Max in our living room the next morning, "has better instincts than half the force." Max didn't react to the praise. He sat calmly, tongue out, eyes still scanning the room. For a brief moment, we all exhaled. Not completely, not in a celebratory way, but enough to feel the weight begin to shift. Mercer was caught. The man who had been haunting our movements, lingering at the edges of our life. He was in custody. But Max didn't relax. The next few days were quiet. The house was calm. Mom cooked more. Dad smiled again. I slept deeper. We returned to our routine, careful not to pretend nothing had happened, but grateful for the calm. Max resumed his porch post, but his eyes softened slightly. He let himself be petted longer, dozed in the sun more often. Until the phone call. It came early in the morning. I was getting ready for school, Mom was making coffee, and Max had just trotted in from the backyard. Dad answered on the second ring. "Jim, it's Brett." We all froze. "Mercer's missing. He escaped custody overnight." The words hit like a cold wave. The kitchen seemed to shrink. Mom set down the coffee mug slowly. I felt my stomach flip. "How?" Dad asked. "They're still figuring that out," Brett said. "But your family needs to be on high alert. He's not just some unstable guy with cameras. He's organized, and he knows you're home." Dad thanked him and hung up. Max had already moved to the front door. He stood there, tail still, nose to the air. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We do what we've been doing," Dad said. "We trust Max." But we didn't just trust him. We followed his lead. That morning, Dad took off work again. Mom stayed home. We triple-checked the camera feeds, adjusted lighting angles, and made sure every entry point was secure. Max patrolled with purpose. No more porch naps, no more casual sniffs around the yard. Every step was measured. Every pause was loaded with awareness. Then, the next night, we saw him. Just past 3 a.m., the backyard camera caught a blur. A figure darting past the shed. We reviewed the footage 5 times, pausing, zooming. It was Mercer. He had returned. But he hadn't approached the house. Not yet. Max watched the screen with us. When the figure moved, his ears perked. When the image froze, he growled. The sheriff's department returned. They searched the area, brought in dogs, swept the woods behind the house. They didn't find anything, but the deputy said what we already feared. "He's toying with you." That night, I slept on the couch downstairs. Not because I was scared, though I was, but because I wanted to be near Max. He lay across the floor, facing the door, body still but eyes alert. Just before sunrise, he stood. I opened my eyes immediately. He looked at me once, then toward the window. A second later, we heard it. A tap. Gentle. Repetitive. From the basement again. Dad and I moved together. He grabbed the flashlight. I held Max's collar, though he didn't need direction. When Dad opened the door, Max bolted. We followed. Down in the basement, it was quiet. Still. We moved toward the wall where the chute had been. Nothing. No sound. Then Max turned. He sniffed along the floor to the back corner where the sump pump sat. He barked. Once. Dad crouched. Lifted the cover. Inside, wedged between the pipes, was a phone. Mercer's. He had been back. Inside, possibly hours ago, we handed it over to the authorities. They confirmed it contained GPS logs, notes, even live audio recordings. He had been listening, watching, planning. But the phone gave them a break. They traced one of the last signal pings to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. The sheriff's team moved fast. They didn't find Mercer. But they found another room. A replica of our living room. Couch, lamp, rug. Photos printed and taped to the wall. Dozens of notes, timelines, behavior charts. A large red circle drawn around Max's photo. He had been studying the dog, Max. Our shield. The detective's voice was grim when he called. He's obsessed. Not just with you. With your dog. He sees Max as the thing that keeps him out. He was right. Max wasn't just our defense. He was our symbol. And Mercer, for all his planning, couldn't get past him. But that also meant Max was the target. And whatever Mercer planned next, Max was the one he had in mind. The replica room shook us in a way we hadn't felt before. It wasn't just unsettling. It was deeply personal. Seeing our couch duplicated, the same pillows Mom had bought from a home goods store 2 towns over, photos of us mimicked and taped up like some kind of performance stage, it made our skin crawl. But what stopped us cold was the red circle around Max. A thick, angry ring of marker ink that looped around his printed face again and again, like an obsession boiling over. The detective didn't sugarcoat it. This guy doesn't just see Max as an obstacle, he sees him as a challenge. He's going to come back. The only question is when. So we prepared. Not just with locks and lights. We sat down together and made a plan. An actual, detailed, everyone has a role plan. We practiced what to do if someone tried to enter the house. What to do if Mercer was spotted nearby. We coordinated with Brett and the sheriff's office to set up daily check-ins. They even gave Max his own tracker, a small device attached to his collar that would ping our phones with his location in real time. But the thing was, Max didn't change. He didn't get anxious. He didn't show fear. If anything, he seemed more focused. Almost like he was ready. It was me who started to unravel a little. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd stay up just to watch Max go about his rounds, making sure he was still there. Still safe. I didn't tell my parents, but I'd get up and stand at the window just to make sure Mercer wasn't standing at the edge of the woods again, just beyond the reach of our lights. And for a few days, nothing happened. Then came the call from the school. It was a Tuesday. I was in science class, halfway through a worksheet, when I was called to the office. My stomach dropped. I thought maybe something had happened at home. But when I got there, the principal was standing with a police officer I didn't recognize. "Your dad's on the way," the principal said gently. "But we need to speak with you for a moment." The officer asked simple questions. Had I noticed anyone following me on the way to school? Had I seen any unfamiliar cars parked nearby? Had anyone tried to talk to me recently? I shook my head. No. Why? The officer hesitated. Someone was spotted near the south parking lot this morning before school started. They left quickly when a teacher approached. Surveillance footage suggests it was Ronald Mercer. I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. He was watching me. Again. Dad showed up 10 minutes later and drove me straight home. Max was waiting at the door when we pulled up. The moment I stepped out of the car, he pressed his nose against my arm and let out a low whine. Not from fear, but from recognition. Like he knew something had almost happened. From then on, I didn't go anywhere alone. Mom rearranged her work schedule so she could be home during the day. Dad adjusted his to cover the evenings. Even when I walked into the backyard, Max went with me. Always a step ahead, or just behind, ears tuned to everything. That Friday, we got another letter. This one wasn't hidden or slipped under a door. It was taped to the porch railing with black electrical tape. Short, block letters. Not over, not until he's gone. We gave it to Brett. He didn't need much more to act. A judge approved a temporary surveillance order. Unmarked patrol cars parked at both ends of our street. A drone was used to scan the wooded area behind our home. But Mercer wasn't found. That weekend, we installed a metal gate at the top of the basement stairs. Not just a baby gate, an actual reinforced barrier with a deadbolt latch. We added another lock to the crawlspace panel, then filled it with heavy boxes. Dad lined the chute in the basement with cinder blocks and rebar. All the while, Max watched. Quiet, present, focused. Then, for a brief stretch, the quiet returned. Days passed. Nothing new. No notes. No sightings. I went back to school. Mom started baking again. Dad got through a full week without leaving his tools on the dining table. And then one night, just after midnight, the smoke alarm in the kitchen blared. We all scrambled out of bed. Max was already at the kitchen door, barking. But there was no fire. Just smoke. Black and bitter, seeping in from the window over the sink. Dad grabbed a flashlight and flung the back door open. Max shot out ahead of him. That's when we saw it. A small pile of burned paper and melted plastic, still smoldering. It looked like a mix of photographs and bits of cloth. Someone had tried to light it under the kitchen window. Max darted toward the trees. His bark echoed into the woods, fierce and determined. By the time the sheriff's car arrived, there was no sign of Mercer, but they found footprints, deep and erratic. One shoe, then another half-bare foot. A trail that led to the rear fence, where something sharp had sliced through the hedge. Mercer had been there. Again. And this time, he wanted us to know it. That night, Max wouldn't come inside. We left the door open, but he stayed on the porch, staring into the trees. He didn't sit, didn't lay down, just watched. For hours. Eventually, I brought him a blanket and sat beside him. "You don't have to do this alone," I whispered. He leaned slightly into my side, just enough to let me know he heard. The next morning, things escalated. A neighbor 3 houses down found their garage door pried open. Inside, someone had moved boxes, cut into a tarp, and left a cigarette burning on top of a towel. It hadn't caught, but it could have. Brett gathered the neighborhood that afternoon. A small community meeting in the middle school gym. He shared what they could, told us to stay alert, report anything strange. He even pulled me aside afterward. "Your dog," he said, "is probably the reason none of this has gone further." Max waited for me in the car, head resting on the doorframe, watching the lot like he always did. Back home, we settled into what we called lockdown light. We didn't use that word in front of anyone else, but that's how it felt. Curtains drawn. Lights on timers. Max's collar now included a camera in addition to the tracker. Everything was monitored. And then Mercer finally made a mistake. It was around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Max alerted first. A low growl from the hallway. Then he barked. Sharp. Urgent. Dad flew out of bed. I met him at the stairs. This time, Mercer hadn't come to sneak or watch. He came to get in. One of the garage side windows had been shattered. The camera caught him halfway through the frame, trying to pull himself inside. He had a knife in one hand and something like a crowbar in the other. Max hit him before he made it all the way through. We watched the footage later. Max barreled down the hall, leaped into the garage, and launched himself at Mercer. There was no hesitation. Mercer fell backward, landed hard on the concrete, scrambled up, and ran. But Max chased him. By the time the police arrived, Max had driven Mercer into a ditch along the fence line. They found him there, banged up, panting, arms scratched from thorns. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word. But he never took his eyes off Max. They loaded him into the cruiser, and Max just stood there, silent, guarding. This time, Mercer wasn't going to escape. They had him on multiple charges: surveillance crimes, arson attempts, attempted break-ins. Still, Max didn't let his guard down. He sat on the porch that night, and the next, and the next. We understood why. Because for all the threats, the close calls, the nights of fear, Max had never once let us down. And somewhere deep in those dark woods, he knew there would always be another shadow. And he would be ready. Max didn't sleep much after they took Mercer away. Even with the suspect in custody, the trial pending, and the patrol cars swinging by regularly, Max remained on high alert. We all noticed it. The way he moved through the house at night. The way he stood at the base of the stairs, ears twitching toward the basement. The way he positioned himself between us and every door without anyone asking him to. He didn't trust that it was over. And deep down, neither did we. 3 days after Mercer's arrest, the news ran a story on it. A segment that aired late in the evening showed our neighborhood from above, the cul-de-sac blurred slightly, with clips of law enforcement removing boxes of evidence from Mercer's trailer. They didn't name us directly, but it wasn't hard to guess who the family with the dog was. That part of the story captured more attention than we were prepared for. Reporters started showing up. Not a lot, just a few freelance types looking for a quote or a photo. They stayed at the edge of our street. Some called our house. One even mailed us a request for an interview in a sealed envelope with a hand-drawn paw print in the corner. Mom tossed it into the shredder. Max didn't like them. Not the mail, not the cameras, not the voices echoing from the end of the block. He barked if they lingered too long. He paced by the windows whenever someone hovered near the curb, but it wasn't fear. It was duty. Like he understood he was now a symbol for something larger. Dad started fielding questions from other dog owners, at the hardware store, at the gas station, even in the parking lot at the grocery store. How'd you train him? What kind of dog is he, exactly? Do you think my shepherd could do the same thing? Dad always gave the same answer. Max wasn't trained for this. He chose this. That Friday, we got a letter in the mail, this one from the sheriff's office. Inside was a commendation. Not for us, for Max. A certificate printed in bold letters that read, "In recognition of exceptional service and courage." Attached was a small silver tag shaped like a badge. The sheriff himself dropped by the next day to deliver a second one, custom engraved with Max's name. Max sniffed it, wagged once, and sat proudly. Brett leaned down beside him. "You know you saved them, right?" Max licked his hand. That weekend was the first time we went out as a family again. Nothing big, just dinner at a pizza place near Town Square. We sat on the patio, ordered too much food, and watched as people walked by. Max came too, of course. He lay under the table with his nose pressed to my shoe and his eyes scanning the crowd. A few people stopped to say hi. One older woman, soft-spoken and kind, knelt beside him and said, "Thank you, soldier." Max didn't move, but I could feel his tail sweep lightly once across my ankle. That night, when we got home, the house was quiet, peaceful. Max made his usual rounds, then curled up by the fireplace and dozed. We stayed up a little later than normal, playing cards and talking. For once, we didn't feel the need to check the cameras every hour. But just after midnight, the system pinged. Motion alert. Backyard. We all stopped. Dad picked up the remote and pulled up the feed. It was nothing. Just a deer, pausing by the edge of the garden before leaping the fence. But Max had already moved to the back door, ears up. He stood there for 5 minutes, unmoving, watching. That was the night I realized something important. Max didn't trust that it was ever truly over. He wasn't just reacting to Mercer. He was watching for whatever might come next. And that meant we had to do the same. The days passed, then weeks. Mercer was held without bail. His case made the local papers again when new charges were added. More families came forward. Photos found in his trailer matched addresses as far as 2 counties over, but none of those houses had a Max. One afternoon, I found a letter on my pillow, folded neatly. No envelope, my name written across the front. It was from Dad. "I see how you watch Max," it read. "How you worry about him, like he worries about you. I just want you to know that what you two have, it's rare. It's real. And it's the reason we're safe." I sat with Max on the porch that evening, the sun falling in golden streaks over the trees. "You're not just a good boy," I told him. "You're everything." He rested his head on my knee. By mid-October, the town invited us to a community event in the park. They called it Neighborhood Safety Day. There were booths about alarm systems, workshops on emergency planning, and a tent run by the sheriff's office with a banner that read, "Our heroes don't always wear badges." Max was the guest of honor. He wore his tag, sat politely on a special mat, and greeted dozens of kids and grown-ups who wanted to pet the now famous dog. A man from a local radio station interviewed Dad. A high school art class presented a portrait of Max, painted in warm tones, his eyes bright and calm. But Max didn't seem interested in any of the attention. He spent most of the time watching the woods that bordered the park. He hadn't forgotten. That night, after the event, we got home and went through our usual motions. Doors locked, curtains closed. Max took his place near the hallway. Around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of rain. Soft at first, then steadier. I padded down the hall and saw Max sitting by the front door. I joined him, and together we watched as drops slid down the glass. Then he stood. He moved to the window and growled. I followed his gaze. Through the trees, a flicker. Not a person. A light. A small one, low to the ground, like a signal. Dad came downstairs, flashlight in hand. We stepped onto the porch together. Max led us into the yard, nose low, every muscle taut. The woods were silent, but the grass was wet with footprints. Not Mercer. Someone else. Brett and his team arrived within 20 minutes. They searched the area, found nothing. But the prints were real. The light had been real. Someone had been there, watching again. Whoever they were, they'd waited until Mercer was gone. Max sat at the tree line for an hour after the patrol cars left. Watching. Breathing slow, unshaken. When he finally came back to the porch, he didn't lie down. He stood, like he was on shift. Like this was only the beginning. And I believed him. Because Max always knew before we did. He still does. Max stood guard through fall and into winter, as if his very presence was what held the edges of our world together. The cold didn't bother him. He would sit on the porch through frost and sleet, his ears perked and breath fogging in the air, watching the woods like they owed him answers. And while Mercer was locked away, Someone else had taken his place in the shadows. A reminder that danger didn't always end when a person was caught. Sometimes it lingered in the spaces they left behind. The footprints that night in October hadn't belonged to Mercer. That much was clear. The tracks were smaller, the gait lighter, more cautious. Whoever it was had experience, and they had waited for Mercer to be removed from the equation. It made everything feel more dangerous, not less. Because this new figure hadn't sent letters or made noise. They didn't want to be seen. They wanted to stay just close enough. Brett updated us weekly. There was no new activity on our property after the rain, but they did start checking nearby trails and abandoned sheds. Still, they found nothing. No name, no camera, no motive. It was like chasing a ghost. Max wasn't rattled. He adjusted. He started patrolling further into the woods, venturing just beyond the property line before returning, always the same way. At night, he took up his place in the hallway again, facing the back of the house. And every time we thought maybe this time would be different, maybe we were finally in the clear, he reminded us otherwise. It was the week before Christmas when everything came to a head. We were preparing for a quiet holiday. No travel, no big family gatherings. Just the four of us. Mom, Dad, Max, and me. We strung up lights on the porch, baked cookies, and decorated a little tree we'd picked out together. Max even had his own stocking this year, filled with treats and a brand new chew toy shaped like a snowman. For a while, it felt like we had made it. That illusion shattered on December 22nd. The day started like any other. Max and I took a walk around noon. The snow had settled into soft drifts across the backyard, muffling the world. Max sniffed along the fence, then darted toward the trees. I followed, crunching footprints into the white. Then he stopped. Not because of a squirrel or a noise. He just stopped, staring straight ahead. Not barking, not growling. Just still. There, hanging from a branch at eye level, was a single piece of string. Dangling from it was a dog tag. Not Max's. A different one. Plain metal, scratched. No name. We called Brett immediately. He arrived fast, trudging through the snow with another deputy. They took the tag, bagged it, and scoured the area for other signs. There was nothing. No fresh prints, no scent trail Max could follow. Just the tag. That night, Max didn't leave the back door. Not once. Christmas Eve came with a storm warning. Ice was expected to roll in just after sundown, and most of the town shut down early. We huddled inside, fireplace glowing, tree lit, watching old movies and trying to ignore the unease that clung to the corners of our thoughts. Just after midnight, the power went out. It didn't flicker. It dropped, all at once. 1 second we were warm, laughing at an old holiday scene, and the next we were sitting in silence, only the crackle of the fireplace left to light the room. Max stood up immediately. Dad grabbed a flashlight. "Probably just the storm," he said. But we all knew better. Max moved to the hallway, then to the basement door. He barked once. I followed behind him, flashlight cutting a narrow cone through the darkness. The basement hadn't made a sound, but Max was certain. When we opened the door, he bolted down the steps. I rushed after him, calling his name. I heard him snarl, sharp, defensive, then a crash. When I reached the bottom, Max was lunging at a man trying to climb out of the old coal chute again. This one wasn't Mercer. He was smaller, faster. He had something in his hand, a long piece of rebar, rusted on one end. Max didn't hesitate. He blocked the man's exit, snarling, teeth bared. The man swung the bar once, but Max dodged it and lunged again. Dad appeared beside me seconds later, and behind him, Brett stormed down with 2 other officers. Someone must have already been on watch when the power went. The man tried to run, slipping past Max, but didn't make it far. Brett tackled him at the base of the stairs. They cuffed him, dragged him up, and called it in. Max stayed where he was, panting hard, eyes still trained on the chute. When the lights finally came back on, the man was sitting in the back of a patrol car. His name was Jared Carr. He had no relation to Mercer, no criminal record, and no apparent motive. But when they searched his car, parked deep in the woods behind our house, they found journals, dozens of them. He'd been watching our house for months, studying Max, studying us. He referred to Max in strange ways, calling him the barrier, the challenge, even the sentry. The journals were filled with drawings of Max, over and over, variations, in armor, in shadows. Some pages just said the word dog 100 times. He wasn't trying to rob us. He wasn't trying to hurt us. He was trying to outwit Max. But he failed. That night, Brett stayed late. He sat with us in the living room, fire back on, lights glowing gently through the windows. The air was quiet again. "I think this might actually be it," he said. "This guy's behavior, the way he tracked you, it's not like Mercer. He wasn't part of something. He was obsessed. But Max?" Max stopped him. Max was lying by the fireplace, finally relaxed. Not asleep, but close. The next morning was Christmas. We opened gifts slowly, sharing stories and cinnamon rolls. Max got his snowman toy and carried it around proudly, occasionally dropping it into someone's lap like he wanted us to throw it. For once, we all laughed without checking over our shoulders. By New Year's, the house felt different. Not because the threat was gone entirely, but because Max had given us something else, something stronger than fear. He'd given us belief, in safety, in second chances, in the idea that some bonds go beyond training or words. They're formed in trust, built through time, and held together by action. Max slept easier after that. Not because he let his guard down, but because he knew we understood now. We'd learned to read the signs, to listen to instincts, to follow the one among us who always knew first. And as winter melted into spring, and the sun returned to warm the porch where Max liked to rest, we realized something even deeper. Max hadn't just protected our home. He had changed it. We weren't the same family who adopted him months ago. We were stronger, quieter in our awareness, louder in our gratitude, closer. The basement door stayed locked, but not out of fear, out of memory. It was where Max had proven, again and again, what love looked like when it stood between danger and the people it protected. One evening, a neighbor passed by and asked if we were ever going to fence off more of the backyard now that Max was older. "He doesn't need a fence," Dad replied. "He knows his line, and no one crosses it." We all looked out at Max then, lying just beyond the porch steps, head up, ears listening, always ready, always home, and finally, at peace.